Marvelous. How lovely to see so many people's names popping up. We'll get started in just a minute as folks come into the virtual space here. We'd love to actually see your faces, even though we can't be in person for this particular session. So I'd love to invite you if you feel comfortable doing that. If you would put yourself, let us see your handsome and beautiful faces and show your appreciation for our ocean this wonderful World Ocean Day. So I think it looks like we may be at full complement here. So let's go ahead and get started. We have about 45 minutes together. And again, I'd invite you, if you feel comfortable, coming onto your camera. I think most people are familiar with Zoom. We're going to ask folks, if you have a question, if you could raise your hand. And that is in the reactions section down at the very bottom. If you click on reactions, you can raise your hand. It's the lowest bar down below. So with a few little bits of housekeeping out of the way, I'll begin. I'm Lori Arguelles. I'm Director of Communications for NOAA. Delighted to be with you today. CHOW holds a special place in my heart as the founding president of the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation. I remember when we kicked this off, 21 years ago. I think Mike Gravitz, you might have been around for that one. So what we're going to do is we really like this to be more of a conversation than a talking at you. So I'm going to kind of just moderate the discussion, introduce my colleagues one by one. With one or two rounds of questions, and then we'll turn to you. So let me just say again, Lori Arguelles, Director of Communications. We're asking folks to also share their portfolio. So mine is the breadth and depth of NOAA. So from the surface of the sun to the depths of the sea, working with my communication colleagues around the agency, and also working through our external affairs folks to make sure that our stakeholders are engaged and invested in our work. So let me turn it over to Makeda Okolo.
And I am using multiple devices to participate today. Good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to see your faces and to hear your voices in a little bit. My name is Makeda Okolo, and I am NOAA's Director of Legislative and Intergovernmental Affairs. And similar to Lori, I have a very 5,000-foot view as I work to help all of our staff and line offices communicate their priorities, respond to interests from the Hill and from our governors and mayors and other locally elected officials around the nation. And it's just really great to be here today. I'm looking forward to lots of questions and having some great discussion.
Thank you, Makeda. Let me turn to Miro Korenha, who works with me in the communications arena.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see your faces. My name is Miro Korenha, and I serve as Senior Advisor to Administrator Spinrad. And like Lori, I work across all of NOAA in helping shape his messaging and talking points and engagement when he is out and about and talking about all the great work we do at this agency.
And Miro is one half of the dynamic duo that was our Daily Planet. And I know we all miss it very much, although I personally am glad to have the pleasure of her company every day. So we also have members of our policy team, which is fantastic. And so let me start with one of our day one babies, Letise LaFeir, who I think many of you know quite well. Letise.
Thanks, Lori, and thanks for reminiscing on starting CHOW. So it was COD when you first started it, right? Capital Ocean Day. It was great to join that team and keep it going for a few years. Letise LaFeir, I'm also one of the senior advisors, and as Lori alluded to and Dr. Spinrad usually says, one of the plank holders, because there were just, I was the senior advisor on day one. So everything was in my portfolio, and I am so pleased to see how many other senior advisors are on the screen. And this isn't even all of us. There's some that just couldn't make it. So at this point, I'm more focused on conservation and science, though still work quite a bit on equity and tribal engagement and fisheries issues and other things that arise. But that's becoming more and more of my portfolio as the team has grown in the past few months.
And just to interweave both our oceans and our atmosphere, we have several of our I won't say the words dry side. You did not hear that come out of my mouth. That was just your imagination. But some of our colleagues who are maybe a little more skyward focused. So Shalini, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Lori. I was going to say the exact same thing. So we don't say dry side and wet side, but can we say the look up side versus the look down side? So if that's the case, then my name is Shalini Mohleji. I'm part of the look up side. I do all the work for the National Weather Service in NOAA headquarters for Dr. Spinrad. So mostly weather things. I also do disaster resilience for the droughts, extreme heat, and wildfire work we do here. And I also do some work that I'll probably talk about later on the new blue economy. So that is my connection to some of the oceans work I'm doing. So I'm looking forward to that. And this is my first CHOW, so I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Shalini. And we'll stay skyward for the moment and let me call on Perry.
Hi, I'm Perry Brody, and I am another one of the senior advisors on the policy team. I handle NESDIS and the sort of space side of NOAA. But even though Shalini said it's the look upside, the satellites look down. So I'm the up and down side, I guess. And I actually spent 26 years on Capitol Hill. And so I know how important it is for folks like y'all to come to DC or come virtually and make sure that your members of Congress and your senators and those on the key committees know that these issues are important to you. And so thank you for what you're doing to bring attention to this really, really important ecosystem of our world.
Nice allegory, Perry. Appreciate it. And we'll close out this initial round with Adena Leibman.
Hello, so I'm the newest addition to the political senior advisor team in the administrator's office. My portfolio includes working with our Office of Marine Aviation Operations, so the line office that operates NOAA's vessels and aircraft, and also includes the NOAA Commissioned Officer Corps. And then I also work on a topical piece of my portfolio is offshore wind. So I work across all the NOAA line offices that have equities and contributions and responsibilities in pursuing the president's goal of deploying more offshore wind by 2030.
Great. Thank you, Adena. So as you all probably know, because you are invested and vested stakeholders in NOAA, that there is a lot of interaction. Of course, we were well named the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, since there is so much interplay between the two. And you know, as Dr. Spinrad has conveyed some of his key priorities, including building a climate-ready nation, the new blue economy that was referenced by Shalini, and also making sure that equity is infused into everything that we do. I think you'll see those ideas and commitments really reflected in our strategic plan that will be released a little bit later on this summer. But those are some key terms and ideas that I think you're going to hear over and over again as we kind of weave those together throughout this conversation. So start thinking about your questions. Again, at this point, I think we'll do the raise hand function. If that doesn't work, we'll default to the chat function, but plan to get your hand ready to be raised. Find that bar under the reactions. But I thought it might be fun, just as we get to know each other a little bit better, for each of the folks on the NOAA side to give a little bit of the origin story of kind of how we came to love oceans and or atmosphere, although it is Ocean Week, so maybe a little more on the blue side. And how that sort of personal journey maybe has affected one's professional journey. So I'll just start and say that I had the great pleasure of being a California girl growing up in Santa Barbara on the beach. Really always loved and appreciated the ocean, determined after a couple of maybe failed attempts at chemistry that marine biology might or might not be my best choice in life. So my path as a journalist and professional talker has led me to this agency. This is actually my second time at NOAA. I was here back in the Clinton administration in a similar role. And I'm just really grateful to be back with some of the most dedicated public servants that the American American public has the benefit of having invested in. As we have often said, it's a nickel a day per person. All the things that you get from from NOAA, from the weather forecasts to your GPS positioning to you name it, we've got it. And so I found my path to NOAA early on, and am delighted that I have never gotten past step 5 of the 12-step NOAA recovery program. And so here I am right back in the thick of it again. And that's sort of my NOAA origin story. Makeda, would you like to, we'll kind of follow maybe that same path.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Lori. Similar to you, I would say, you know, where I grew up probably influenced my love for NOAA the most. And so I'm from the Virgin Islands, and more specifically, I'm from St. Croix, which is a little teeny tiny territory of the United States, pretty close to Puerto Rico. But when you grow up on an island and you're surrounded by water, I mean, you know, so much of our life, our culture depends on the ocean, right? You go to the ocean for healing. If you're sick and you have a cold, they say go to the water, right? If elders have aches and pains, they go to the ocean. Of course, having lived through hurricanes, there's also that element of it as well, right? And so when I think about, you know, why I came to NOAA, ultimately it boils down to wanting to be a part of an agency that has such a strong voice and cares so deeply and so passionately about these issues that are impacting a community that is near and dear to my heart. Beyond that, I could sort of joke around that I grew up on the Hill, and I worked for Congresswoman Donna Christensen from the Virgin Islands for a really long time. And as you can imagine, we had NOAA in the office on many, many, many occasions, whether it was on fisheries issues or coral issues, and the list sort of goes on. And so to have the opportunity to engage on these very same issues, but from a very different vantage point within the agency, sort of understanding the inner workings and helping to be a voice and help others to better understand our territories was, I feel like, an opportunity that I just couldn't pass up. And so there's a lot more to the story, but I'll pause there, and hopefully we can get into more of it during Q&A.
Thank you, Makeda. Miro, how about you?
So I grew up in Northern California, and I didn't realize that you could go to the beach without wearing a fleece jacket for many years. And then later I went to school at UC Santa Barbara, which originally I thought I would major in econ, work in corporate finance, but when you have this beautiful body of water around you, it's so inspiring every day. And it really kind of changed my perspective of maybe what I wanted to do for a career. And so most of that career was spent in climate and conservation communications and messaging and stakeholder development. And prior to this, as Lori mentioned, I founded an environmental media company called Our Daily Planet. And to me, that once again really showed the power of good messaging and how people can really be inspired to take action, big and small, if they're hearing the right message. So my interest in coming to NOAA was an opportunity to play a small part in getting the story and the message of what this agency does out there to ensure that folks not only understand the risks that they're facing from the climate crisis and from biodiversity issues, but also the opportunities that they have and ways that they can get involved, and all the inspirational tales of how important our ocean and atmosphere and planet are. So I'm really lucky to have landed here and to get to work with a really great team of very dedicated folks every day.
Thanks, Miro. Letise.
I grew up on the other coast, so they say. I'm a Chicagoan, so the Great Lakes was my introduction to just huge bodies of water. So as a kid, I didn't recognize that there was a bigger, broader ocean out there. My mother was an educator, a single parent, so I watched lots of PBS Discovery Channel. So I really started to fall in love with the ocean through media. So through watching these Discovery Channel documentaries and those kinds of things. And then I discovered the Shed Aquarium, which was truly my connection to the ocean. And so from that point on, I think it's just about 7th grade when it registered for me. My mother says she knew when I was younger, but it didn't register for me until about 7th grade. And I would go back to the Shed Aquarium just over and over. And I started to do some of their high school programs. I just kept doing the Shed Aquarium experiences. And decided I just want to be a marine biologist, and I applied for schools with that in mind, and ended up moving to the East Coast to pursue marine science. So it's interesting that I've fallen in love with the ocean without having spent so much time there. And then it just started to come together from there, and having those experiences in Rhode Island first and then in Delaware, and I became a Sea Grant Fellow. I know many of you know the Marine Policy Fellowship. I started to say, well, now that I have this science background, how do I save the ocean? You know, what are these policymakers doing out there to protect this place? How does what I know help inform that? And I started to do that science policy nexus, and NOAA was a great place to start doing that. So from the Sea Grant Fellowship, then to the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation with Lori, where I was working hand in hand with NOAA, and eventually came over to NOAA's Office of National Marine Sanctuaries for a while. I now have come sort of full circle after years of leaving that and coming back here into the Undersecretary's office to be able to make all those connections real and think about all those experiences where NOAA has been, you know, really a key part of my career from the beginning.
Thank you, Letise. Shalini.
Yeah, I was trying to think of my answers, and they were so bad to this that I was saying, well, let's see. I went to school in landlocked Indiana and then landlocked Colorado, so I don't have a story there. And I work on weather things. Here's where I'm going to go with this. I am a meteorologist. I am a boundary layer meteorologist. And so my research is on air-sea interactions. So I will take that one, you know, looking at the effects in the Bay of Bengal and the Arabian Sea from the monsoon season. So that'll at least get me invited to the event. I can stay up for a little bit longer. And then I'll say, I'll just jump ahead a little bit and talk about one of the projects I'm working on to sort of earn my stay for the rest of the panel. One of the priorities that Dr. Spinrad has at NOAA right now is on the new blue economy. And so what we're looking to do, I have some experience working on data sharing and on commercialization. And so one of the ideas is to look at the marine technology that we have traditionally worked on in the blue economy, and then looking at, on top of that, what we call the data economy, which is the knowledge economy, and how we can open up a lot of NOAA's ocean data to spur economic innovation and to create more companies, to create more data brokers, things like that, and to expand the market opportunities in the blue economy. So that's one of the projects I'm working on right now. I'm happy to talk about that more later, but I guess I'll just leave it at that for my ocean experiences.
You're always invited to the party, Shalini, especially because you always know what the weather is going to be at the party. So that is very, very helpful. We appreciate it. Perry and then Adena.
Well, I'm from Alabama, and in Alabama, we have some pretty bad weather, and people in the South like to sit on their porch and watch the bad weather. So growing up, we did a lot of watching the amazing nature safely from the porch. And we always had a NOAA weather radio. So I knew NOAA from very early on, you know, because we always had to make sure we had our NOAA weather radio so we could get our tornado warning so then we could go to the basement. And also I grew up not too far from the US Space and Rocket Center. So space was also very near and dear to my heart. And in the early 90s, yes, I'm dating myself. I was a young lawyer who didn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And I was so excited that I could come and work for NOAA because I love weather, I love space, and I did ledge affairs for the National Weather Service during the big modernization. We're putting new radars in around the country. Some people wanted them because they thought that they needed that for better weather. And some people didn't want it because they thought they were going to be irradiated. So I actually learned the map of the United States that I didn't really know before, just by having every single office in Congress in my portfolio. And then I did NESDIS and the Office of Space Commercialization, which was what it was called at the time. And then I went to Capitol Hill for 26 years and worked for different members, one who wanted a radar and got one from Alabama. So, because weather was really important to him. And then my third and final member was my first coastal office. So I was really excited to finally get to have the side of NOAA that had the fish and the ocean and the coast. And actually, just kind of like what Shalini was saying, there are ocean aspects to NESDIS and the satellite side. For example, we have instruments that are for ocean color. And among the many things that those instruments do, one of them is to keep an eye on the harmful algal blooms so that we know where they are going to be in the ocean and how maybe we can help fix them. And then one other really big side of NESDIS is the data. We have more data, atmospheric, coastal, ocean, geophysical data than anyone in the world. And just one example of some of the ocean things that are going on, this thing called Seabed 2030, it doesn't belong to NOAA, but NOAA is taking all the data that people are collecting of the seabed, mapping the whole seabed floor. And by 2030, they're going to take all that data and make sure that it's not just a big pile of data, that it's accessible, that it's usable, and it can help us to can help our ocean community to survive.
Good decision making based on good data for sure. Thank you, Perry. Adena, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second, but I'm going to ask folks again, thank you for the chat that is moving along. You know, love the support of different things that are meaningful to you. We see names, but what I'm realizing is we're not necessarily seeing your affiliation. So anybody who'd like to just put in the chat both your name and your affiliation and maybe your favorite thing about NOAA, that would be fun. So let's just kind of populate the chat with that. And in the meantime, if you can multitask, also be thinking about what questions you might like to ask. So Adena is our last person before I'm going to start calling for questions. So get your hand ready to go flying up in the air. Adena?
Thanks. I feel like my path to NOAA is a little bit like the saying, you know, long time listener, first time caller. I feel like my career has circulated around and adjacent to NOAA for the majority of it. It was my first time getting to actually serve within the agency, which is a real privilege and something I'm forever grateful for. My path is also one of knowing your strengths and weaknesses and figuring things out along the way and being okay with course correction. But I was like from a very young age, someone who always chose like the shark stuffed animal over Mickey Mouse type thing. And my parents made me a Dr. Eugenie Clark fan from like the age of 2 or 3. So I was just obsessed with becoming a shark lady in my own right for forever. I was born in Philly, so not a coastal city, but I had the benefit of the Camden Aquarium and 2 younger sisters who were willing to deal with seeing the sharks again. And we moved to Appalachian, Western Maryland, and I got to know the National Aquarium in Baltimore. And then eventually moved to coastal South Carolina. I actually got to see the ocean every day, which was amazing, and worked in an aquarium myself. So the aquarium path is similar to Letise. So it was a good help for those of us who didn't grow up right on the coast. I ended up going to get my undergraduate and graduate degree in marine science in South Carolina. And I worked on sea turtle population genetics, which was super cool and interesting. I was kind of left with the question of like, so what? Like, what is the impact of this work? And, you know, will my neighbor care? Which led me into the Knauss Fellowship, the policy fellowship here in DC, to try and bring science and ocean onto the Hill and to make some of those policy changes. I thought it was going to be a year sabbatical and I was going to go for my PhD, but I fell in love with the policy and law side more than the scientific lab side. So I went to law school instead. And I thought maybe I could be a litigator. So I dabbled at DOJ and at Bonneville Power Administration, another federal agency, realized, no, don't want to be a litigator. I really am a policy person. And came back to DC. So I've worked in nonprofits, but the bulk of my career has been on the Hill, also working for a New England senator as his ocean and coastal natural resources staffer. but then went back to the NGO side, and now I'm here at NOAA. So all of it though in the ocean and coastal path. I never strayed from that, though I dabbled in different arenas and titles underneath the ocean and coastal space.
Awesome. Thanks, Adena. And thanks for those of you who are sharing a little bit more about you and your connection to NOAA. So I'm going to open the floor. Are there questions? Anybody who'd like to raise a hand? And Brent, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lori. There were some references during the Capital Ocean Week to the UN Ocean Conference coming up later this month. And so one of the questions I had was, just to the degree that NOAA is going to be either having a presence or engaged at that conference. And then also if there were just any updates on the solicitation for nominations on the Ocean Research Advisory Panel and also the new area-based Marine and Coastal Advisory Committee.
Letise, I see you nodding your head, so I'm going to let you take at least the majority of that one.
Yes, and I'll see if I can remember it all off the top of my head. I'll go in reverse. The ORAP, so the Ocean Research Advisory Panel nomination, call for nominations will come out later this summer. I think we're on track for that, but I need to double check the sort of timing. The Marine and Coastal Area-Based Management Advisory Committee, we expect to formally establish and ask for nominations by the end of July. So that one will come sooner, I think, than ORAP, but I think both will be out by the end of the summer. Don't totally quote me on ORAP, but I think they both will be out by the end of the summer. And then on UN Ocean Conference, yes, NOAA will have a delegate, will be part of the US delegation. So Dr. Spinrad will be one of the formal members of the US delegation going, but we will also have Nicole LaBeouf, who is our Assistant Administrator for National Ocean Service, attending. We will have Kelly Chris, who is our Deputy Assistant Secretary for International Fisheries, attending. And then we will have 4 other staff attending in some capacity on EPAs, ocean acidification, et cetera. So a total of 7, I think, going from NOAA, but with Dr. Spinrad, Nicole, and Kelly being the principals as part of the delegation.
Awesome. Thanks, Letise. And just for those of you who don't remember, yeah, there you go, Brent. That's it. You have to, under reactions, you both raise and lower your hand by clicking on that little happy face at the bottom of your screen. So other questions? I know this isn't a shy group. Mike, go ahead. Oh, Mike, you're on mute. And if you maybe just want to, I know you introduced yourself in the chat, but maybe you just want to do that again.
So sorry.
No worries.
So I don't quite know who to ask this question of, and maybe perhaps several of you could answer, but if you were looking forward ahead 2 years from now and looking backwards, what would you define as sort of success in your mind for NOAA in terms of additional progress on sort of marine protected areas, habitat conservation, in the America the Beautiful plan? What do you think, you know, for the next 2 years, what tangible progress should we, would you be happy to achieve in those areas?
Well, maybe Letise, I don't want this to be, you know, all on your shoulders, my dear, but perhaps since you are the America the Beautiful queen of NOAA, you might want to take a stab at that. And then Adena, I wonder if you have some things that you'd like to add there too.
I think big picture, Mike, for me, success will mean there's some kind, America the Beautiful might not exist anymore in name, right? But we have baked in some of this work in a way that there is an ethic, like their community saying, hey, this is in the pipeline and we're working with a federal partner and we have a grant to support that. You know, there's some pieces that are actually rooted in some way that was launched because of America the Beautiful, right? And so not being able to say, well, we finished this designation and we finished this thing, because you know how the process goes. It's hard to finish anything in 2 years, but I think looking back to say we planted seeds that are sprouting, right? not just planted the seeds and left them going, that we could look back and say we did it. So that's what I think. And that's, for in that, the MPAs, et cetera, but also seeing that more people, more broader diversity of people are saying, and we were a part of that, right? It's not just the same organizations or the same big states with big money, but folks that are saying we became a part of that and we were able to get a new park or trail or whatever it is that might be important to them, or this pond where we go, this hidden gem of a pond near our neighborhood that no one knew about. And now in some way it's going to stay conserved for our benefit, that local community. So that's my response. That's for that broader ATP question.
Yeah, and I'd invite anybody else who wants to chime in with an answer on that to do so. I would say, Mike, from my perspective, building a little bit on what Letise said, that NOAA has always had a very committed group of stakeholders. I don't know that it has necessarily grown as exponentially as it could or should. And so I think that Dr. Spinrad has really made this a priority. He's reaching out to a lot of groups. Emily McAuliffe, who many of you know, unfortunately was not unfortunately for her, she's on vacation. Unfortunately for us, she's not a part of this particular conversation. She was also a day one NOAAite this go round, and has been doing a lot of work in conjunction with Letise and others on a series of listening sessions, roundtable listening sessions. And so, we're starting to have conversations with like the American Medical Association. Like there's a very strong climate component to, there isn't a person or a process or a company or a place that isn't touched by climate change. And so I think that, exponential expansion of stakeholder engagement with equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility in mind is very, very important. And so I would say that that's going to be part of my own measure as I look at the kind of external affairs component of my portfolio. And I would note that very recently, the Commerce Department has a new member of the Office of Public Engagement team. Andres Torres is the head of the faith-based neighborhood partnership initiatives. And I think that that is, from my own personal experience, I really feel like creation care and conservation communities have a lot of overlap that haven't always been fully realized and explored. And so I think we'll see more people at the CHOWs of the future. And not just at CHOW, but engaged kind of all around. And that would be my measure of success. And so let me throw the floor open. Is there anybody else who would want to tackle an answer to that before we go to Lisa?
I was going to just add on, from my perspective and working on things like offshore wind also, I think, we'll see steel in the water in 2 years on these bigger projects. And I think it's going to be really cool. Mike talk about like the tangible stuff too. I think, there'll be places where you can look out in the ocean and you can see everything happening at once, like everything happening in synergy. You can see climate mitigation, greenhouse gas reductions happening with a spinning turbine. You can see protected areas and ecosystem conservation. You can see, sustainable fisheries happening. You can see green shipping happening. There'll be places in our country where you can look out the coast and see all the things happening at once. And our goal at NOAA is we really sit at that node of making sure that all that is happening and possible and is not inherently in conflict, that there is a way for all of this to happen at once. So I think, in 2 years, it seems far away, but it's actually not that far away and it's starting now. But that's part of my job is to make sure that that's what we see, is that we can see it all happening at once. And for all of the benefits and missions that NOAA has for the American people, we can do it all at the same time and all together.
Walk and chew gum at the same time, right?
Thank you all.
Yeah. Lisa, let me turn to you, and then Alyssa put a question in the chat.
Great. Thanks so much, Lori. Lisa Frank, I'm the Executive Director for Environment America's Washington Legislative Office. And my question for all of you, there's obviously a lot of marine species that are really in crisis right now, the North Atlantic right whale, the Chinook salmon that the southern resident orcas depend on. If you could, over the next 2 years, save one species and see it thriving in a healthy ocean environment, what would it be?
Well, it's kind of like asking to pick your favorite child, right, Lisa? And I'll go back to Perry noting that we are in an ecosystem, right? So you probably can't have one thrive without others thriving. So, I think maybe that is ultimately the goal. But that would be my unofficial, unscientific opinion. So Letise, do you want to grab onto that one too?
I was just going to agree with that. And I think adding the layer of the extra work we're doing now to integrate science and indigenous knowledge, we're really understanding that in different ways now, of course. So it'd be hard to say, let's only save the whale when we know we need to save krill, right? So that's a tough one. I have 2 babies. You're giving me nightmares of standing on the edge of a bridge and going, okay, I think, but seriously, we are trying our best to think through those approaches if we're hitting barriers as we try to move management approaches on one species and how it connects to the other decisions we're making, and hoping moving them together would help make progress.
Yeah, Makeda, do you want to offer any thoughts on that? I know that that delicate balancing act is one that you are doing every day on Capitol Hill with lots of different people who are not as reluctant as Letise and I to pick a species.
No, we can't. It's impossible. It's really impossible. I too have 2 little boys, so Letise, I'm with you. I can't even like commit that image into my mind right now. But I think if I had to pick a favorite, as you see behind me, there's a coral reef emblem. Coming from St. Croix, coral reefs are such an important part of our marine ecosystem, from like protecting us from hurricanes and surge to being the foundations of our fisheries, right? And that's for many, many reasons, whether it's culturally, the food that we eat, and or the wider dynamics that are at play. So I'm not picking one, but I'm highlighting one that perhaps is one of my favorites.
Well, and I love that coral reefs are nursery grounds for fish, and fish are a symbiotic part of that ecosystem and feed other bigger fish. And on and on it goes into the interconnected web of life. And speaking of connections, maybe Alyssa, I'll just read your question out loud. Talking about in the chat this morning, panelists spoke on the need to move quickly on connecting and protecting waters while there is support from the current administration. Knowing that the designation process takes time, what can be done right now to ensure these activities will continue despite administrative changes? So I would just offer, again, Letise, I hate for you to have to answer all these questions. So, folks, feel free to chime in. But I think, it ultimately comes down to, what do people want? Elected officials respond to what people want. And we maybe haven't always done as good a job as we could in the ocean community of, maybe we capture hearts, but I don't know that we necessarily engage minds, and that we make that heart-mind connection to the action piece, right? And I don't know if it's that the actions are not specific enough, or if there are so many other problems that feel more compelling, or the ocean is your special place. Don't tell me there's anything wrong with that. I just want to go vacation there. I think that it really comes down to democracy functions, or not, as the case may be, based on the involvement of the people that are invested in that democracy. And so, the power is really with each individual. And it's a matter of how do we motivate those individuals and help them, irrespective of administration change, one presidential administration to the next. There has to be this common cause, this common thread, this common element. And, I don't know how many of you heard Jane's, some of her remarks in the closing session this afternoon. She gave a nerdy answer, which I could not even begin to repeat, much less. It was essentially like, as humans, we tend to like go right up to the tipping point of disaster and then take action. Some of us might feel like we're past the tipping point, but you know, that collective action really is a powerful force. And she cited things like, you know, we wear seatbelts now. We're not smoking in public in restaurants in the way that we were before. So what is the ocean corollary of that? You know, it's climate change. And the more we are seeing the impacts of climate change in these incredible amounts of rain that are in our storms, in the incredible intensity and the winds. I mean, I think it's up to all of us to really make that connection back, and make it clear how protecting our ocean, protecting our species is protecting our own life. Because ultimately we're pretty selfish creatures in the grand ecosystem of you know, all of the phyla. So so that would be, you know, kind of my thought. But I would love to hear if others have additional thoughts. Letise, I know you give a lot of thought to this.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and not say specifically on designations, but in general, like how do we keep some of the things going that we're getting started? And I'll just acknowledge a few of our senior advisors that aren't here. Makeda Brown is the senior advisor in equity. It's the first time that we are aware that a NOAA administrator has elevated a position like that. We know Zach Penny is our senior advisor on tribal engagement. As far as we know, that's the first time the leadership office has had a senior advisor like that. Of course, we have our chief of staff and other staff. So this is also the most diverse set of leaders, and the perspectives we bring help us think about the decisions sort of long-term based on our lived experiences. And so with those kinds of things in mind, we're thinking about, well, how do we build tribal liaisons full-time into our budget? How do we build community liaisons for equity into our budget? How do we build some of these into the operations and in that way, build that capacity so that designations can keep going and so that people still care about it, so it remains part of the fabric of NOAA's operations and culture. So again, that kind of ownership that starts to happen within the agency and with our partners will help it keep going beyond all of us senior advisors then leaving our appointments.
Yeah, thanks, Letise. Anybody else want to chime in on that? If not, I think we have time for one more question. Okay, Sasha, thank you for putting your question to the chat. Tips, advice, field entry opportunities as an interdisciplinary student. What would you recommend? She's a student at George Mason, currently in business management as an undergrad, and is a scuba certified, coral reef loving, conservation minded individual. So what rays of hope can we offer to Sasha? What advice?
Can I chime in as someone that kind of I was an econ major who then found my way into environmental issues. I would say just be open to lots of experiences. And, you know, I think oftentimes when we're in our final year of college, we have a career in mind, and that seems like the only thing we want to do. But, you know, take different types of jobs. And one of the things that Dr. Spinrad really talks about is that, you know, it's a benefit to all of us when members of Congress understand about climate and environmental and coastal issues, or doctors, lawyers, home builders, architects, everybody. So I would say, you know, don't just limit your potential job and potential field to something that maybe is within an NGO or an agency. You can take that passion and really apply it a lot of places, and those places will benefit from you having your interests and your experience and your knowledge.
My path was completely different, but I wanted to echo what Miro was saying. When I graduated from college with a communications degree, I knew I was going to be a lawyer in Alabama. I went to law school. I went to be a lawyer in Alabama. But then I moved up here for my boyfriend, who's now my husband. But that got me into this job at NOAA, and my whole life turned around. I went from there to Capitol Hill and was on Capitol Hill for 26 years. And I got to do this amazing work with space. And then I finally came back here, but there was nothing in my head that I could never have imagined the path that my life took. And I tell young people, you can have a 5-year plan, but my 5-year plans never worked out. Things just sent me in different, and I love where I've been and where I am, and be open to opportunities you think might be odd, but maybe it'll turn into the greatest thing that's ever happened to you.
Including the prospect of internships at NOAA. So, the Knaus Fellowship, I'm sure there are at least a couple of, I know one Knaus Fellow that's on this call, Letise. I'm sure there are others as well. And so, I think the Presidential Management Intern Program, I think the PMI program is still around. There are extraordinary opportunities that NOAA puts forward. And so I would suggest looking up, I'll see if I can find it very quickly, but there's a place perhaps on our education website that lists all different opportunities. And it just never hurts to, my mama always said, if you don't ask, you don't get. So, ask people, ask them for advice, ask them for opportunities. Ask them for, what you think you might need, ask them for their experience. And I would totally concur with that openness. Shalini, Adena, anything that you all would like to add? Makeda?
I just wanted to kind of pull a thread on that last comment that you made, Lori. My advice always is to build your village, build your community, and that starts now. It's funny, I went to the CHOW dinner last night and I ended up sitting next to someone from my grad program that I haven't seen in years, right? I mean, folks that I'm working with here are folks that were on Health Natural Resources Committee when I was serving my boss. And so, the little golden rules that I feel like you hear as you're growing up end up being sort of like the very foundation of the keys and like the magic ingredients to your professional success. And that's one that has really proven useful for me, and it's one that I definitely encourage, right? And it's everyone. It's not just those that are sort of vertical to you, but it's also those that are horizontal, right? Because those are going to be the leaders around you as you matriculate through your career as well. So really invest some good quality time in building your network, building your village, identifying those mentors, those sponsors, those that really believe in you. And bring them along your journey along the way. Always continue reaching back and keeping them posted, because it's good for you, it's good for your mental health, but I think your career will also thank you for it as well.
Yeah, I know we're just a few minutes over time. I would just say it's definitely, I want to acknowledge your question about going back for an advanced degree, master or above, and does it help or does it not? I think to Makeda's point, it's the people around you. And if you feel like people in the academic community will be part of that village and can help you, and that additional knowledge is valuable, great. But, I took some time in between getting my master's, which was in public communication, from my undergrad degree. Actually got my master's while I was working at NOAA the first time around. And so, I think it's such an individual choice, but whatever path you choose, build that village. I think that's really the key. Network the heck out of life. And you'll seek knowledge and connection. And, as you do it authentically, of course, you will find, I think, a plethora of opportunities. So any closing words from anybody? With that,
Happy World Ocean Day.
Yes, I think that's it. 1, 2, 3. Happy World Ocean Day. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.